Just very quickly, I want to talk about Falcon X, but growing Falcon X beyond the Valley. Lochan, I'll give that to you. So what we did is we've taken a company in Dallas. We incubated in Dallas because it made sense. A fuel company. And then we brought it to the Bay Area. And we grew it from $5 million to $100 million. It's now a unicorn. We took a company in Estonia and decided to bring it to Dallas. And it's a company that does striping of lines. And so Dallas is a great place to bring it. So I think as we grow our network points, we have them in Estonia, we have them in Israel, we have them in Dallas, we have them now in the Valley. We can take these startups and take them to where it makes sense across various product lines at different times of their product growth as well. And so just think of that power that Falcon X brings through our partnership, through other partnerships. Not just the Valley. The Valley is fantastic, but there are some other areas as well that we can grow into. With that, I want to bring on Inderpal. Inderpal, please come on. We want to talk about the next subject. Thank you for being here. So Inderpal, I love your name, and you and I talked about it. But tell me your history. How did you get here? I mean, this is a big job that you have at IBM. Use that. That's good.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's great to be here. So the journey, I'm a Carnegie Mellon PhD, and
the mic's not working.
Yeah.
Put it like this, yes.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes, that's better. So, well, let me stand. I think that might make it easier as well. So, Carnegie Mellon PhD. And after that, I did a stint with IBM Research for 7 years. I was there at the Watson Research Center. And I kind of got into the data journey actually, at Carnegie Mellon, my advisor was a gentleman called Herbert Simon. So he was the father of AI. So I was one of the very early engineering AI PhDs. And then Carnegie Mellon got into the data journey. Long story short, I ended up creating this computer program. You can Google it even today. You'll find some interesting information on it, which ended up being used by every team in the National Basketball Association. And they used it to identify lineups that they would play in playoff games. So that was an extremely high-profile, successful effort. And it also taught me that I like to do things end-to-end, not just the research part of it. So, which then led me to start my own company, Virtual Gold. I ran that for about 10 years, made every possible mistake that you could think of running that company. But I kind of liken it to my MBA on the street, because I really had no experience in terms of running a company, managing people, etc. I was a researcher after all, right? So. But it did give me a very deep appreciation of corporate America, especially around data. And it hit me, this was in 2006, that enterprises could actually make very strategic use of data, but they didn't know it. And again, long story short, I got a role as the first chief data officer in healthcare in 2006. I kind of created that role. There were only 4 of us globally with that title. And that includes all the other affiliated titles, Chief Analytics Officer, Transformation Officer, Digital Officer. There are only 4 of us. And then the profession took off. Now there are literally thousands of us. And I was just fortunate to be there at the right time so I could grow with the profession. And I began getting called by other organizations to come and create this, organizational capability, as they put it, for them. So I've done that now. This is my 4th go-around at IBM, perhaps the most complicated, endeavor, being that we're a global, far-flung company. But for me, by now, it's a craft. I know exactly what I'm going to do day 1, day 6 months, day 12 months, in terms of bringing that capability into a large organization and making data strategic. So that, in a nutshell, is the journey.
Okay. I'm going to stand up as well with you. So thank you for the background. So you've got an incredible background, right? So let's get a little technical. From your perspective, what is the one thing, or maybe it's more than one, but let's talk about one thing, in terms of how data will be managed, delivered, and presented in the future?
Yeah, so what we've noticed is that from an enterprise standpoint, there are a couple of data points I'll give you. The average large enterprise uses upwards of 9 clouds internally. And also there are their own data centers and so forth. There's also, from a workflow standpoint, there's actually a very small percentage of the data that's in the cloud. It's like 15 to 20%. The rest of the workflow is kind of still in-house, on-prem, in some private cloud, and so forth. So there are multiple reasons why that is. We've kind of looked at it. But we believe it's going to be a hybrid multi-cloud world. So some of the workflows will stay on-prem. There will be data eventually will be then scattered across clouds, private, public, on-prem data centers. If it's a large global company, it will be globally distributed. So that essentially is the world that we're talking about. So think about the complexity of managing data in that environment. That's the biggest problem. That's the biggest challenge. That's kind of what...
So it seems like it's still first innings, right? I mean,
first innings.
Because you're talking about 15% in the cloud, right?
Yes. It's first innings for the... I'll say another couple of things here. I mean, from the standpoint of these multiple clouds, data centers, we ended up acquiring Red Hat because they had this product called OpenShift, which allows for portability across all these multiple clouds and data centers. But then what we've now realized is because the data is going to be distributed, there are regulations now, there's regulatory pressure, both on data as well as on AI, which will result in data residing wherever it originated. You won't be able to take it out from there. So you kind of have to play it where it lies. And that's kind of will define that second innings that we are talking about to leverage that space.
So I'm sure you can see the future. Tell us a few more things. I mean, where do you see so technology is probably still rudimentary, still early. Where do you see it going? Give us a little bit more into the future.
I think that, conceptually you can think of it in the form of a data fabric. And I'll give you the way I tend to think about it. There are a few components that will make that up. One is, think of it as an augmented knowledge graph, which itself you can think of as the next evolution of metadata, right? Metadata is data about data. And so, but in the case of augmented knowledge graphs, you'll kind of know where the data is, what it's about, who can access it, what are the compliance policies that need to get around it, and so forth. Once you've got that in place, then...
I think we're okay.
Okay. Okay. Once you have that in place, that allows you then to do automation intelligently, right? Because the automation has to be based on something. And if you don't have that augmented knowledge that I just talked about, you won't be able to automate this effectively. The third big thing there is because you've got to play the data as it lies, you have to have self-service capabilities. So, because of the regulations, what you can do in Singapore, you can't do in Germany, vice versa. And so you kind of have to play it where it lies. If you think in terms of trying to do that centrally, it's going to be a nightmare. You really need to think of it in terms of having a marketplace that can be used globally, self-service capabilities. You've got to do that. The governance aspect of the data becomes very critical as well. And it's got to be multimodal because these regulations are different in different countries. So that's another major aspect of it. The life cycle then that you need of all these elements that I talked about, you want to automate that as well. So that, otherwise it becomes very complicated to do this stuff. And finally, the implicit question is how are you going to pull all this off? You actually have to turn the paradigm of AI on its head. So typically you talk about doing AI after you get the data right. Well, to get the data right, you're going to have to use AI. So.
Fascinating. So you're talking about distributed databases, where they are, GDPR, all those other things getting in the way. And so if you try to pull it all together, you'll just die. Basically, that's what you're saying, right? So you sort of hinted on AI. And Sundar Pichai said AI is like the next electricity, but there's also a lot of talk about ethical concerns. In fact, a lot of our companies have now hired ethical officers into AI. Talk about that if you don't mind. There's a lot of conversation about getting into AI, but then some of the concerns around it.
That's a really good question, and I'll give you some background. I mean, in the 1990s, we had a computer program that defeated Garry Kasparov, the chess champion, AI program. 2011, we had a program that won Jeopardy. Again, AI program. But we kind of really struggled in figuring out what does AI mean to enterprises. That was, wasn't the algorithms at all. I mean, that's kind of what we learned as we moved forward. The algorithms are, of course, important, but for an enterprise to make use of AI, they have to trust it. And there are various reasons. One is system that's basically sitting there in your processes, because AI actually, for an enterprise, what it means is you've got to infuse it into all your major processes. Supply chain, procurement. Diane talked about efficiency, right? It's an efficiency play for an enterprise. That's really what it is. You can reduce cycle time by up to like 90% end-to-end on your major processes if you apply it that way. And so if you think of AI in that mode, then you've essentially got to think about a company that's using AI. It's saying, well, here's the software. It's learning stuff. But what is it learning? Well, it's learning my IP for my company, right? I mean, a lot of Amazon, a lot of the secrets are in supply chain. So the company's got to be really comfortable. So that's one aspect of trust. Then you've got other aspects that come in. If you're talking about data that has to do with people, it has to be fair. It has to be free of bias. So if there's an HR department hiring people, say in retail, tens of thousands of people, and there's bias, this whole thing is going to blow up. You can't do it. It's got to be robust, because these AI systems can be fooled. You've heard about those examples of the automatic driving system essentially mistaking the full moon for a stop sign coming to a halt. These systems can be fooled. I mean, you can essentially present them with data and edge use cases which then fool them. So it's got to be robust. That robustness has to start all the way from the data itself and its lineage, and to the AI pipeline, and eventually to the data itself. If it's data about people, privacy, extremely important. And it's not as obvious, right? In the case of straight data, if you're looking at straight data, you can look at it and say, yeah, this is likely to violate somebody's privacy. We're giving away their name, their address, etc. If you're talking about AI, very often you start out with data that may be fine. Doesn't look like you're going to violate anyone's privacy. But you infer things, and you don't know what you're going to infer. So once you infer something, there's this infamous example of this large retail outfit which essentially sent a flyer to a household about prenatal vitamins. And the father was furious. Young lady was only 16, etc. But eventually turned out, they were right. The retail chain was right. They made the right inference. But they totally violated this person's privacy. And so that's why you're going to see all kinds of regulations around AI, because it has the possibility of doing great good, but it also has the possibility of being misused. So I think these factors then are critical for enterprises. And that's got to get baked into the AI platform that enterprises
and the
use.
Governance of it,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Okay, so let's shift. I see younger people here, I see entrepreneurs here, I see parents here. What skills should they be thinking about? Since you talk, this whole industry seems to be first innings.
Yeah.
What should we be thinking about? What should we be learning? What should be from school to college? And just tell me what you think is important.
So in a way, it's good news, because I'll tell you, if you cast it in the context of digital transformation, what we've learned is you've got to keep 4 elements in lockstep. Data, so obviously knowledge around data, skills, expertise around data, that's important. Technology, mainly because if you do AI, and especially the more esoteric stuff, the technology has got to be really streamlined to run the hundreds of thousands of experiments and so forth. So the technology expertise, process. From an enterprise standpoint, it has to be infused into process. So now you're talking about process transformation. Processes are run by people. Now you're talking about culture change. You let any of them slip, the whole thing slows down. Because eventually, it's about getting those 4 elements in. So if you translate that back, the hard skills, the quantitative skills, obviously, they kind of make up the first 2. But the domain knowledge, that's process. For people, it's the softer skills. So they all become extremely, extremely important.
That's fascinating, right? People over-focus, and I see a lot of South
People
Asians here,
over-focus.
and I'm going to make a generalization. They over-focus on the hard skills,
Yes.
and you're telling me that soft skills will dominate in the long term.
The soft skills will dominate, because the people problems are actually the hardest, the cultural change.
Okay, so we'll go to the last question. We have lots of questions, but the time is running out, so we'll go to the last question. What do you think, there's a bunch of entrepreneurs here, what should they be thinking about? You said this is in the first innings.
Yeah.
So tell us what the entrepreneur should be thinking about this industry, what they should be doing, or inspire them in any way you want. Any final words?
Well, it's a great time to be an entrepreneur. There's just so much possibility, so much potential. It is the first innings, especially in the enterprise space, for a lot of this stuff. So anything you're doing in data, AI, cyber, this is all just rife with opportunity. It's yours for the taking. I'll give you one other story, which is hopefully inspirational. I talked about my own journey as an entrepreneur for 10 years and how I made every possible mistake. And I was talking to somebody and telling them, I made every possible mistake. I didn't take VC money. I didn't trust them. I came out of IBM. I only let the technical people follow me. I didn't go after the business people, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There were so many. It's a litany. And he kept listening. And then he says, what do you think was your biggest mistake? So I picked one. And he says, no, I don't think so. I said, what was my biggest mistake? He said, you should have continued making those mistakes for another 10 years. Because you were ahead of your time, but those problems are still relevant. And he pulled the example of this company called Fractals, which had started just a couple of years after I did. They found a way to hang on, and they're like a $2 billion company now. So, take it till you make it. Don't fake it till you make it. Take it till you make it.
Those are the final words,
Those are my
right? Keep making mistakes. Thank you very much for being here. Thank you. That was amazing.